Do you know how many Lamborghinis you have owned in your entire life?
So I've had 64 cars in my life. I'm able to keep that as a list on our VINWiki app so I can go back and see what's happened to them since I sold them. Lambos had 9 Mercies, 5 Gallardos, 2 Diablos. So yeah, I mean a bunch, and that's most of the wealth that I've ever accumulated has been in buying these cars and flipping them or making them go up in value. And so, we were talking about cost bases and things like that. Like, it's all very, very low because they all represent a lot of transactions becoming whatever is here. So, I mean, I got rid of 7 cars to buy that. And it, that's how the whole thing works.
Yeah, but hearing your stories, because I've watched your channel for probably 7 years, maybe 8 years, since the very beginning. You buy these cars at a price where you can't possibly lose money. Like, it seems as though the offering price is so good and you'll only buy a car if it really makes sense. Is that true?
Well, it is, and there's always a price where everything makes sense. And, the thing that sellers are really bad at is disclosing everything that could devalue a car because they're worried about it. And as a car salesman, because I worked at Lamborghini Atlanta from 09 to 15, you want to make the buyer use as little imagination as possible because those gaps that they're trying to fill in are the fear that keeps them from buying the car. If it's terrible and you just tell them that it's terrible, they don't worry that you're lying to them because it sounds so bad. And so I was always very forthcoming, very honest, probably to a fault at times, but it just made it easier for people to commit. And that's the mindset that I have when I'm trying to lowball somebody on a car. It's not me trying to undervalue the car. It's me trying to cushion it by the things that I can't know are okay. And of course, as I learn more, I might become willing to pay more. But, when people talk about making money on cars, they call them investments and things like that. And in most cases, that's not precisely what it is. Usually it's an arbitrage. And so, if you get an allocation for a brand new ultra rare Ferrari, people are like, oh, this was a really good investment. No, it wasn't. Like, it's an arbitrage because you are a very small market of people that were allocated this car. And you can choose, if you want to burn the bridge with Ferrari, to offer it to the whole wide world. And they don't have the opportunity to buy the way that you do. And that creates a new market that has more ability to spend or more willingness to spend. And so what I'm doing in most cases is buying a car in such a dilapidated or horrible state that most people would just not consider it. And then I live in the margin between utterly unacceptable and okay. That is where I like to be. I don't want it to be good. I don't even want it to be perfect. I'm not taking it to car shows to win anything. I'm taking it just to have fun, rack up miles, and never worry a thing about. And so, I've had a lot of success in doing that and in figuring out just how little you can offer where they're not going to be so insulted that they hang up the phone, but that if you go with full commitment, I don't need an inspection. I don't need anything else. I mean, when I bought Missy Elliott's Spiker right there, I knew that she hadn't seen it in 5 years. She said it wouldn't run. She didn't know why, probably just a dead battery and stale fluids and all this stuff. But I had no idea what level of reconditioning it would be required. And I was able to build in that much of a margin because given the circumstances of the way she wanted it sold, nobody else would have taken or nobody would have bid it.
Maybe take us back to the beginning because you have some very interesting businesses that led you to this point.
Yeah. So the first business was breeding albino iguanas in my parents' basement.
How do you do that?
Well, I just found...
explain the process to Jack.
I found one for sale online. And then at one point I had every known heterozygous for albinism iguana on the planet. And so I was not great at it. And I was not that much of a businessman, but I just thought it'd be super cool. So we had 36 6-foot-long lizards in cages in my parents' basement. I must have been 14 or so and kind of did it through high school. Well, sold some of them, didn't make a ton of money, but learned a lot about, how you run a business, what accounting looks like, how you'd manage the books. And, the fact that, obviously they only reproduce once a year. And so you'd have to plan for, this is how much I might make and this is how much it takes to keep it all going.
How much were they?
They were at that point between $5,000 and $6,000 each.
What?
Yeah. And so obviously the ones that aren't albino but carry the gene, the heterozygous ones, were a lot less valuable. And so we were able to, make some. And I ended up selling the whole lot of it as I went off to college to not Tiger King, but one of his friends. He was actually in one of the opening scenes of Tiger King. And I'm like, there he is. And I hadn't talked to him in years, but he moved them all down to Florida. They were a little more prolific when they're able to live outside. As everybody in Florida knows, there's iguanas at every underpass.
How do you get the first iguana, though? Like, how did that start to get like an albino of that?
Well, I had a pet one for a while. And so, and it was awesome, a great pet. And I always thought, oh, more reptiles. And I mean, as soon as I learned that you could have dinosaurs that fit in cages, I was sold on it as a kid. And so we had all sorts of weird stuff. And my parents were very overly indulgent in those kinds of ridiculous obsessions. And so I learned a lot from them about, some of the crazy things that were out there in the world. I mean, we were not wealthy by any stretch, but they were able to, show me like, hey, this is that. And they weren't car people either. So I wasn't out wrenching with dad in the garage. This was something that I really, not until I could drive, I became obsessed with. And so just growing up and reading as much as I could and researching how businesses worked, because I didn't come from an entrepreneurial background or family. They had no idea, but they just were like, oh, well, this seems like a reasonable experiment for you to try and learn and fail and figure it out. So I don't know if that's, skill or luck or whatever, but it was always just like trying to figure out how to throttle and how to understand the risks involved with whatever it was you were trying to do.
What was the profit margin of that whole business?
Well, what you look at, you have no real cost in the egg, but when you can sell something for $1,000 to $10,000, the problem was always figuring out the profitability afterwards and deciding if it was actually even worthwhile. And that's the way all farming works. Now, this is a very peculiar example of farming, but you watch Clarkson's farm and they don't know if they're making money until long after a harvest and sale and figuring out all the logistics. And so the same was true for my next real business, I suppose, which was much more legitimate than that, but was in college, I started an exotic car rental company. And, you see so much on YouTube about people renting cars out on Turo and doing all these other things to try to make their car payments and stuff like that. But in 2006, when I was after my sophomore year at Georgia Tech, that was a time when you could still get stated income loans for exotic cars. So as a 20-year-old, you just fill out the application and tell them what you thought you were going to make, and they would approve stuff. And so I bought my first Lamborghini at 20 years old. I didn't have enough money to make the first payment and immediately started a rental car company. And with that, the same issue was true. You couldn't tell if you were actually making money really until you sold the car. You could generate revenue, you could get the cars out and make money, but you didn't know when they were going to break catastrophically. You didn't know how much they were going to depreciate. And so you knew, what you had to make all your payments and pay all your bills each month, but you never really knew how profitable the business was, at least until tax time, and a lot of times until you actually disposed of the vehicle.
How much was the Lambo?
I think it was $124,000.
What did you say you were making on the stated income loan?
Oh, probably 200. And, it wasn't long before I was probably generating about that much revenue off the business. And so it was, pro forma income, I now know to say. But it was a very interesting time. But for the U.S. economy, obviously lending practices like that are a lot of the reasons why it fell apart. But I paid all my bills and was able to generate just rock star car credit because I have multiple six-figure car loans at a time, paying them all perfectly. And so, as I shut that down and then moved on into sales at the dealership, I had better car buying ability than almost all my customers because the banks would approve whatever I asked for because I'd proven that I could pay so much in car payments, and they didn't know necessarily that those were more of a business expense than personal because I'm on the loans for them.